but how to explain the emergence of an outlook and a purism that, at first glance, is so naive and detached from reality? It wouldn't be less naive or unrealistic to assign blame to one individual or another. In reality, there's an objective dialectic at work here. In the wake of the struggle against inequality, privileges, discrimination, injustices, and against the oppression of the old regime and its particularisms and exclusivism, with the old ruling class condemned for its pettiness and egoism, the most radical revolutionaries are driven to express a strong, inspiring and high-sounding vision of the principles of equality and universality. It is a vision that, on the one hand, carries the energy and enthusiasm that facilitate the overthrow of the old social relations and the old political institutions, and on the other hand, it makes the construction of the new order more complex and difficult. Will the new order live up to the hopes, promises and ambitions which preceded its birth? Does it not run the risk of reproducing under a new form the injustices so passionately denounced under the old regime? This is an especially delicate question for the fact that the most radical revolutions cultivate ambitious projects of political and social transformation, while precisely because of this unfamiliarity and distance to the existing order they bring to power a leadership group without solid political experience behind them. Moreover, they need to construct and even invent not just a new political order, but a new social order as well. In these circumstances, the thin lines separating an ambitious political project from high-sounding yet empty rhetoric become evident, separating a concrete utopia from an abstract and deceptive utopia, in the last analysis, a synonym for escaping and avoiding reality. To be victorious, not only in the short term but in the long term as well, a revolution must be able to give concrete and lasting content to the ideals of equality and universality that have accompanied it in attaining power. And to do it, the new leadership group is called upon to let go of those naive ideas which they tended to hold onto in the moments of enthusiasm, and they are called upon to accomplish such a task not in a vacuum, but in a historically charged space where those ideas weigh upon economic and political limits, the relation of forces, and have their presence felt in the contradictions and the conflicts which inevitably emerge. It's in journeying through this difficult passage where the revolutionary front, which up until this moment has at least appeared united, starts showing its first internal cracks and fractures, and where disillusionment, discontent and accusations of betrayal make their appearance. It's a process and dialectic which Hegel analyzes with great clarity and depth with regards to the French Revolution. 365 It develops while waving the banner of the universal subject, universal will and universal self-consciousness. In this phase, in the moment of the old regime's destruction, one witnesses the abolition of different spiritual masses and the limited lives of individuals, therefore all social strata are abolished, which are the spiritual essence in which everything is articulated. It's as if society, dissolved of all intermediary governing bodies, had broken down completely into a myriad of individuals who, rejecting all traditional authorities now left without legitimacy, demand not only liberty and equality, but also participation in public life and in all phases of decision-making. In the wake of this enthusiasm and exuberance, in a situation in which it is as if authority and power as such have been suspended into nothingness, emerges an anarchistic millenarianism, that demands absolute liberty, that is prepared to denounce as treason all contamination and restrictions, real or presumed, on universality. A new order assumes a reorganization of individuals within the spiritual masses, in social organizations, intermediary bodies, although constituted and organized according to new and different arrangements that respect the principles of the revolution. However, for the anarchistic millenarianism, society's new formulation, whatever it may be, is seen as the negation of universality. In fact, their activity and the personality's state of being find themselves restricted to one subsection of everything, limited to just one type of activity and state of being. Therefore, limited to the element of being, the personality would thus take on the meaning of a determined personality and would in truth cease to be a universal self-consciousness. It's an analysis that sheds light on the dialectic that plays out for the duration of the French Revolution, but is even more clearly evident in the October Revolution, when the pathos of universality is felt even more strongly, both in its more naive forms and in its more mature forms. In the situation of exalted universalism, which presides over the toppling of the old regime, all divisions of labor, no matter their form, become a synonym for exclusivity and the sequestering of universal self-consciousness and universal will by a bureaucratic and privileged minority. This is true for social relations as well as for political institutions. There's no order that could satisfy anarchistic millenarianism's aspiration for direct and unmediated realization of universality. The manner in which anarchistic millenarianism acts is clarified again in the memorable pages of Phenomenology of Spirit, quote, not to be fooled by either the comedy of obedience to laws that pretend to be the expression of self-government, and to which are assigned only a part, or for the fact of enjoying representation in legislation and universal activities. Self-consciousness won't be deprived of the reality which consists of the writing of its own laws and its completion of not individual work, but more precisely a universal work. In fact, when found only in the form of representation and theatrical representation, the individual isn't real. Where there's someone who is the representative of the individual, there is no individual until we are reminded of the definition that the workers' opposition gives to the bureaucracy in Soviet Russia: someone else decides your destiny. Against this inadmissible expropriation, they demand a leadership that is collective in each phase of decision-making, with the subsequent condemnation of all representative organization. Moreover, any drafting of a constitutional order and even juridical regulation is labeled a priori as an attempted confinement of a rupture with universality, and therefore as the expression of an old regime that's hard to kill. To come into action, to become real and effective and to transform into the true will, Hegel continues, universality must find expression in concrete individuals, it must place at the top an individual self-consciousness. Here millenarianism and anarchism cry out against that scandal. In that approach, the remaining individuals are excluded from the totality of action and play only a limited role. Therefore, the action wouldn't be an action of effective universal self-consciousness. The tragedy of the French Revolution is this: if one wants to avoid reducing it to an empty phrase, the pathos of universality must be given a determined and concrete content. But it's precisely this determined and concrete content that is seen as a betrayal. In fact, its particularity is such that it is labeled as an element of contamination and negation of universality. While this vision prevails, the liquidation of the old regime can't be followed by the construction of a new and solid order. Universal liberty, therefore, can't produce any work or any positive action, only negative action. Universal liberty is only the rush to erase,